Marika the Eternal, God Queen of the Lands Between, Mother of the Erdtree, and between herself and Radagon, the common parental root of Elden Ring's branching lineage of demigods. But despite Marika being at the center of pretty much everything in the Lands Between, until now we've been told surprisingly little about her past. What drove Marika to rise to godhood? And why was she willing to go to such extreme lengths to achieve this end? The answer is far more tragic than any of us realized. I welcome you, Tarnished, to join me, Zayf the Scholar, as I delve into Queen Marika's past and uncover the dark motives behind her twisted actions. Standing at the heart of Marika the Eternal's rule is the Erdtree, the shining embodiment of her golden order, where Marika is venerated as the one true god. As we learn from several in-game sources, Marika's ascension to godhood was punctuated by the removal of the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, and its subsequent sealing away by her shadow, Malekith. And so in Marika's ideal world, instead of facing eventual permanent death, she and her demigod children would have a kind of immortality, their destined deaths having been plucked from the Elden Ring, and their souls allowed to eternally flow to and from the Erdtree's golden boughs. As we would later learn, however, the Erdtree's glowing facade belied a shadowy secret. The Erdtree itself was born from massive bloodshed. While this is something I had speculated upon previously, From Software finally gave us some solid evidence of this fact in the form of the first story trailer that was released shortly before the DLC's launch. In this trailer, we witness a figure who I can now say with confidence is Marika, reaching her hand into some mysterious white flesh and removing a viscous golden material. She then ascends some carnage-covered steps before brandishing the golden substance overhead. The camera then zooms out, giving us a clearer view of the horrifying scene. Marika surrounded by piles of bodies, littering a blood-soaked landscape, the massive piles of corpses on either side of her forming the shape of the Erdtree, and a center opening clearly referencing the entrance to the Erdtree, where we eventually enter it in Lane Dell. But just who are these bloody piles of bodies that Marika used to birth the Erdtree? Well, as we eventually learn by visiting the site of this event, Enir Ilim, these bodies belong to the Tower Folk, the Hornsent. A race born of the primordial crucible, the Hornsent viewed signs of the crucible as sacred, with their tangled horns in particular considered to be sublime artifacts, their presence confirming the belief that they are a chosen people. Aside from being able to infer Marika's responsibility for killing the Hornsent by viewing the environmental evidence of the massacre in Enir Ilim, we can also confirm from several sources that Marika sent Messmer to wage war with the Hornsent. Or as we hear from Lida.
Wondering about the Hornsent, are you? True enough. In any other circumstance, he'd be at our throats. Long ago, Queen Marika commanded Sir Messmer to purge the Tower Folk, a cleansing by fire. It's no wonder the Hornsent holds the Erdtree in contempt. That aside, man is by nature a creature of conquest, and in this regard, the Tower Folk are no different. They were never saints. They just happened to be on the losing side of a war, but it's still a wretched shame.
But that begs the question, what motivated Marika to start such a brutal crusade? The answer lies inside an unexpected and creepy place. Inside of some jars. As you've probably experienced for yourself by now, throughout the Shadowlands we're confronted by creepy living jars. These writhing balls of flesh that attack us unprovoked. But living jars are of course not new to Elden Ring, as they were a prominent creature type in the base game, with Iron Fist Alexander being the most notable example. However, it's important to note that the base game jars are different from those in the DLC. In the Lands Between ruled by Marika, the living jars bear seals depicting the Erdtree, and are said to be filled with the remains of valiant warriors who died in battle, inherited from those who came before. Thus, warriors are passed from jar to jar, carrying dreams of greatness. Although it's certainly ethically questionable to create a living amalgam of dead soldiers, presumably no living beings were harmed to create the living jars in the base game, and this is perhaps reflected by their overall happy-go-lucky disposition, or as the companion jar item states, though the jars are brought to life by human flesh and blood, they're all rather kindly folk. Unfortunately though, the jars in the Land of Shadow have a much darker origin, as we begin to learn from this troubled wandering spirit found within the Belurat jail. The spirit states, "Oh please, not the jar. Anything but that. I promise I won't ever do it again. I swear, a living saint I'll surely be. Please, you must forgive me. Forgive me, please." We further learn about the shaman and the jars from the item Great Jar, which is described as the attire of the shamans who perform their worship at jails. They offer their prayers to the innards of the great jars, such that they might be reborn one day into sainthood. This is the cycle of death and rebirth, taken into the hands of mortal men. So from these pieces of text, we can put together that the shaman were a group trying to attain sainthood through death and rebirth via jar rituals. They prayed to the innards of the jars, and as implied by the wandering spirit, were sometimes forced against their will to become the innards of the jars, something they clearly dreaded. So this is already pretty telling, but we learn more about the jars and the shaman by heading to a place called Bonny Village, where we're given some very significant pieces of information. First is the Bonny butchering knife, a weapon of the greater potentates of Bonny Village, an outsized butcher's cleaver used to dismember human bodies in the making of the great jars stored in jails. We actually find several of these potentates still wandering throughout the village, wielding these cleavers and wearing caterpillar masks, which are described as a ritual implement of the greater potentates of Bonny Village, used to ward off thoughts of impurity, doubt, temptation, and other wickedness one is vulnerable to while absorbed in divine ritual. It's also in Bonny Village that we find the ominously named whipping hut, containing a tooth whip. A whip bestrewn with rotting, misshapen teeth, filthy and seething with disease. The teeth are embedded in the whip and dose the victim with deadly poison upon each strike. As the wounds ripen, they grow inflamed and ooze pus. The flesh of shamans was said to meld harmoniously with others. It's also near this whipping hut we find yet another wandering spirit that states, "For pity's sake, your place is in the jar. Nigh sainthood itself awaits you within. For shamans like you, this is your lot. Life you were accorded for this alone." So in short, the shamans seem to have been chosen by the Hornsent for this inhumane jar ritual because of a particular characteristic they possessed that allowed their dismembered parts to meld together. The shaman were rounded up and harvested by the Hornsent, chopped into pieces with cleavers and forced into the jars. The dialogue of the wandering spirit paints this as a fate the shaman were born into, and their only purpose for living. But perhaps the biggest hint to understanding who the shaman were is tied to a gesture you receive near a tree on the outskirts of Bonny Village, aptly named "O Mother." Performing this gesture in front of the Marika statue near the Shadowkeep's back gate reveals a hidden passage that leads to the hinterland and Shaman Village. When I first found this quaint little village tucked away in a hidden glade of flourishing flowers, I was immediately struck by its beauty, but also by how empty it was. Unlike most areas in the Land of Shadow, it was oddly devoid of things trying to kill me. But sure enough, this tranquility and emptiness serves a narrative purpose, as we learn from viewing the items found within. First, tucked away within the hollowed-out trunk of a tree is a carved depiction of a shaman. Near this carving, we find an offering, whose description reads, "A braid of golden hair cut loose. Queen Marika's offering to the grandmother. What was her prayer, her wish, her confession? There is no one left to answer, and Marika never returned home again." Aside from bearing a striking resemblance to Marika herself, this shaman carving will look familiar to you if you ever had the chance to look closer at some of the living jars in the Land of Shadow, since these share many similar features. And while we're looking at the living jars, I'd also like to bring your attention to an observation made by an artist named Albie on Twitter. Notice that the markings on their foreheads are quite similar to the marks found on both Marika and Radagon's sore seals. Moving towards the center of the village, we find a small tree sapling emanating a golden glow, from which we obtain the spell Minor Erdtree, described as a secret incantation of Queen Marika. Only the kindness of gold, without order. Marika bathed the village of her home in gold, knowing full well that there was no one to heal. And so with all this evidence in hand, we begin moving towards an understanding of Marika's genocidal actions against the Hornsent. These were not acts of unwarranted aggression, but rather of revenge. Marika was born a shaman, a people who were brutally persecuted by the Hornsent. Seeing themselves as a superior race, the Hornsent prized the shaman for their jar rituals, due to the innate malleability of their flesh, and over an extended period of time, ruthlessly dismembered and killed them in the hopes of creating a saint through the process of death and rebirth. But Marika wouldn't allow herself to be another victim, rising to power to fight back against her people's oppressors, and eventually enlisting the aid of her son Messmer to purge the Hornsent with his vengeful flames. But this was too little, too late. Her people eradicated, Marika could only offer a braid of her hair in tribute to her grandmother and bathe her vacant village in the kindness of gold, even knowing there was no one left to receive it. I also don't think it's a coincidence that the road to Shaman Village is guarded by 2 patrolling tree sentinels, soldiers that represent the Erdtree and were likely tasked with guarding the village from trespassers. With all of this in mind, does this explain why Marika sought to hide her past away in the Land of Shadow and begin anew with the creation of the Erdtree and the removal of the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring? Was it perhaps less about hiding her own atrocities and more about forgetting the atrocities she and the shaman faced? It seems that Marika wished to create a brilliant new world where she and her children would never have to face death or loss ever again. A world whose bright light would render the Crucible and the Hornsent nothing but a shadow that could be forgotten. Its remnants, like the Misbegotten and the Omen, stigmatized and shunned, just as Marika and the shaman once were. But while this does provide us with some satisfying answers, I'm still a bit unclear on a few things. For one thing, why did Marika use Messmer to fight her war against the Tower Folk, but then abandon him in the Land of Shadow after everything was said and done? It's definitely not the most sympathetic or loving course of action. Sure, Messmer was born cursed, but so were Miquella and Malenia, and she doesn't seem to have abandoned them. If you guys have any ideas here, I'd certainly be happy to hear them. Another question I have is about Marika and the Numen. Are the Numen synonymous with the Shaman? If that's the case, I'm not too sure how this new lore matches up with the already existing lore of the Nox and the Eternal Cities, who we've long presumed had a connection to the Numen. Or is this perhaps a case of all Shaman are Numen, but not all Numen are Shaman? Relatedly, I also wonder what this means in terms of the Black Knife Assassins, who are also said to be Numen with close ties to Marika. You would think that if they too were survivors of Shaman Village, they would probably have a bit more loyalty for her. As always, please leave a comment below if you guys have any thoughts here, as I'm genuinely curious to know what you think. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. It really helps out my small channel a lot, and I genuinely appreciate it. And hey, I'd also appreciate it if you considered supporting my work by becoming a patron, a YouTube member, or buying me a coffee. Thanks a ton for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.